I usually don't ask this early, but if you could like the video and subscribe, it would mean a lot. We're so close to hitting 10,000 subscribers, and your support can really help get my content out there. Thanks. Lucas Morrow, 32. A successful Canadian architect from Toronto, passionate about his career and deeply in love with his fiancée. He's a man of integrity and believes in loyalty and truth. Lucas has a bright future ahead of him, with a dream to design some of the most iconic buildings in the city. Jessica Lee, 29. Lucas's fiancée, a lively and ambitious event planner known for her charismatic presence and a wide social circle. She loves attention and thrives on being the center of the crowd, which sometimes blinds her to what really matters. Alyssa Martin, 30. Jessica's best friend since college who struggles with alcoholism. Her addiction has derailed her career and personal life, but she's manipulative enough to keep people close, relying on Jessica for support and often pulling her into chaotic situations. Oliver Grayson, 35. Lucas's best friend and confidant, a pragmatic man who always has Lucas's back. He sees through Jessica and Alyssa but remains diplomatic, hoping Lucas will see the truth on his own. Officer Claire Bennett, 40. A no-nonsense police officer who plays a pivotal role in exposing the lies that upend Lucas's life. I could never forget the day my life began to unravel. It was a quiet Thursday evening in Toronto, and I was feeling on top of the world. I had just signed a contract to design a new high-rise in the city, a project that would make my name synonymous with luxury architecture. Everything in my life seemed to be falling into place, a great career, a loving fiancé, and a future that looked as bright as the skyline I was helping shape. But things change in the blink of an eye. It all started with Jessica's infamous parties. They weren't my thing, but I loved her, and I'd grown used to her wanting to entertain her large group of friends. These gatherings were her way of unwinding after work, her chance to flaunt her success as an event planner and, I suspect, show off our relationship. I didn't mind. We had an understanding. I'd make appearances, talk to her friends, and then retreat to the quiet of my study. That night, though, was different. Alyssa, her best friend, arrived late, as usual. Even before she walked through the door, I could hear her high-pitched laughter from down the hall. Alyssa had always been a wild card, unpredictable and erratic. She had a certain magnetism, the kind that made you want to be around her, even though you knew it would end badly. That night, she stumbled into the apartment, glassy-eyed and reeking of whiskey. "She's had a rough day," Jessica whispered to me as I shot her a concerned look. "Just let her be." Alyssa was loud, obnoxious, and her drinking had only gotten worse over the past few months. But Jessica's blind loyalty to her kept me from saying anything that night. I didn't want to cause a scene, especially with so many of Jessica's friends around. As the evening wore on, Alyssa became more unhinged. She knocked over a vase in the living room, laughed it off, and then spilled her drink on our new couch. Jessica tried to brush it aside, but I saw the tension in her shoulders. She knew Alyssa was crossing a line, yet she refused to say anything, as if protecting Alyssa from herself was more important than maintaining any sense of decorum. I couldn't take it anymore. "Hey, Alyssa, maybe it's time to call it a night?" I suggested gently, trying not to embarrass her in front of everyone. Her eyes darkened instantly. "What's your problem, Lucas? You've always had a stick up your ass." She slurred her words, waving her drink around dangerously close to Jessica's beloved art collection. I could feel the temperature in the room drop as all eyes turned to me. I wasn't going to engage in a public fight. Not here. Not now. "Let's just sit down," I said, attempting to de-escalate the situation. Alyssa wasn't having it. She lunged forward, losing her balance and knocking over a table, sending glasses and plates crashing to the floor. Jessica hurried over to clean up the mess, and the rest of the partygoers shifted awkwardly, unsure whether to intervene or leave. I stepped in to help, but Alyssa turned on me, eyes blazing. "You think you're better than me, don't you, Lucas? Just because you've got your fancy job and perfect life." I stayed calm. "Alyssa, I'm just trying to help." "Help?" She spat the word like it was poison. "You think you're some kind of hero? Get over yourself." That was it. I took a deep breath, ready to ask her to leave, when she did something that changed the course of my life forever. With a wild swing, she slapped me hard across the face. I stumbled back in shock, the room going silent. My cheeks stung, but what hurt more was the disbelief in Jessica's eyes. "Alyssa! Alyssa!" Jessica gasped, rushing to her friend's side. I expected her to turn to me, to ask if I was okay, to defend me. But instead she wrapped her arms around Alyssa as if she was the one who had been wronged. "I'm sorry," I began, trying to make sense of the chaos. "But she needs help, Jess. This has gone too far." Jessica's eyes flared with anger. "You don't get it, Lucas. She's my best friend. She's going through a lot right now." "And what about me?" I asked, my voice strained. "I'm your fiancé. She just slapped me in front of everyone." Jessica hesitated, glancing between me and Alyssa. I could see her torn loyalties, but it was too late. Alyssa had already begun crying dramatically into Jessica's shoulder, playing the victim as she always did. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. Jessica was willing to let me be the bad guy to protect her friend. The party ended shortly after, and Alyssa left with a few others, barely able to walk straight. I thought the worst was over, but the storm was just beginning. The next morning, I was woken up by the sound of loud knocking. I groggily made my way to the door, only to find 2 police officers standing there. "Lucas Morrow?" one of them asked. "Yes," I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. "We have a warrant for your arrest," the officer said, pulling out handcuffs. "You're being charged with assault." I froze. "What? There's been a mistake." But there was no mistake. Alyssa had gone to the police, accusing me of attacking her at the party. She'd spun the entire event into a story where I had been the aggressor, and Jessica, my own fiancée, had backed her up. I spent the next 48 hours in jail, trying to piece together how my life had fallen apart so quickly. When I was finally released, I confronted Jessica. I hoped, she had been coerced or manipulated. But when I walked into our condo, she was sitting at the kitchen table, eyes red from crying, but posture rigid. "You have to understand," she began. "Alyssa is like a sister to me. She would never lie about something like this." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Jessica, she slapped me! You saw it! You were there! How could you back her story?" Jessica stood up, crossing her arms defensively. "She's going through a lot. She's not in the right headspace, and maybe things got out of hand, but you don't know what it's like to have a friend like that." I stared at her, feeling the last threads of my patience snapping. "You're right, I don't, because I wouldn't keep a friend who would ruin someone's life just to cover her own mess. You saw what happened, and you chose to side with her, not me." "Her! I'm not choosing sides," Jessica shouted, but the truth was evident in her voice. The argument dragged on, but there was no resolution. Jessica refused to admit Alyssa's fault, and I refused to live in a relationship where I could be betrayed so easily. I left that night, crashing on Oliver's couch while I tried to figure out my next steps. Days passed, and Jessica sent countless texts and voicemails, trying to patch things up. But her words were hollow. She was more concerned with saving face than fixing what was broken between us. The arrest had shaken me, but more than that, it was the betrayal, the realization that Jessica had never truly had my back. It wasn't until a week later, when Officer Claire Bennett, the officer who arrested me, knocked on my door again, that things finally started to make sense. "Lucas," she said, "I've been doing some digging into the case. Something's not adding up." Claire had taken a personal interest in the case after seeing how distraught I was during the arrest. She'd gone back over the statements and realized that Alyssa's story had more holes than a sinking ship. It didn't take long for her to track down witnesses from the party who confirmed what had actually happened. Alyssa had been the aggressor, not me. The charges were dropped, and Alyssa was eventually issued a restraining order. But by that time, it didn't matter. The damage had been done. I'd lost trust in Jessica, and in truth, I'd lost trust in our relationship long before Alyssa's lies tore us apart. In the end, I realized that love, like architecture, needs a strong foundation to survive. Jessica had built our relationship on shallow connections and hollow loyalty, and when the weight of reality hit, it all came crashing down. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to rebuild something stronger. I walked away from that chapter of my life with a clearer understanding of who I was and what I deserved, not just in love, but in life. Thank you for staying with me through this emotional journey of betrayal, heartbreak, and rebuilding. Remember, a relationship without trust is like a house built on sand. Have you ever experienced a moment where you had to make a tough decision like Lucas? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Lieutenant Mitchell called our squad together early one morning in late November. Mitchell was a newly minted second lieutenant assigned to our squad, replacing a seasoned veteran. Just great. Well, he wouldn't be the first one I would have to break in. Intel had provided us with information that 3 hostages had been taken, one a young American woman by the name of Emily Thornton, by a terror outfit operating some 200 kilometers from our base. She was being held hostage for a ransom from her family. Our squad had been selected to intervene and attempt to rescue. We were taken to a site approximately 5 clicks from where they were being held. It took us about 40 minutes to make our way to the site. Lieutenant Mitchell ordered me and my spotter to take position on a small hillside some 600 meters from the front of the building, while he and the remainder of the squad made their way to the rear. I am a sniper in the United States Marine Corps, holding the rank of gunnery sergeant. My name is Frederick Wolfgang Steiger, but go by my nickname, Rick, for obvious reasons. My spotter is Lance Corporal Thomas McMurray. We had just taken up our position when we observed 3 hostages being led from the nondescript building. They were dressed in loose-fitting orange jumpsuits, each with a cloth hood over their head. There would be executioners force them to kneel in front of them. The 3 terrors were dressed in long flowing robes from head to toe, with the only visible parts of their body being a narrow strip of their face, allowing them to see, and their hands. The tallest of the 3 terrors stood behind a kneeling hostage with a knife in his hands. I sighted my M110 recoil-operated, semi-automatic, a heavy SASR, special application scoped rifle on him. Just as he drew back his hand holding the knife, I fired. Before the 7.62 round struck him in his forehead, I had sighted and fired at the second target, and then at the third man. My spotter whispered in my ear, "Target 1 down, 2 down, 3 down." In the space of less than 1.5 seconds, 3 men lay dead in the dirt. "Where is the guy, the camera?" I asked McMurray. 20 meters to the left, he answered. I quickly found him in my 30mm scope, just as he was rising to his knees with a pistol in his hand. Before he could fire, I shot him in the back of his head. Then both of us heard sounds of flash, slash bang grenades followed by gunfire from the building. Lieutenant Mitchell emerged from the building and signaled the 2 of us to come down and join him. By the time we arrived at the scene, the 3 hostages had had their hoods removed, and our combat medic pharmacist, Mate William Collins, affectionately known as Doc, was treating them. As I walked up, Mitchell said to me, "Just had to shoot them in the head, didn't you, Gunny? You know how hard that makes identifying them, don't you?" "Yes, sir, I do. But you never know what kind of body armor they might be wearing under those heavy robes." "Headshots are sure kills, sir," I replied. Proving my point, I went over to one of the dead terrors and moved his clothing aside, revealing a high-tech Kevlar vest. "If I had shot him in his chest from where I was, I doubt it would have stopped him, sir." "You're right, Gunny. I should know better than to question you. We'll take some blood samples, fingerprints, and see if the forensics boys can ID them." "Oh, there is 3 more dead in the house." Appears one of them had his tool bitten off, and he bled to death. Simpson killed the other two. We'll remain here for a while, Gunny. You and the doc transport the hostages back to base. The lieutenant had no sooner finished speaking to me when I heard the distinctive sounds of the rotors of the C-Knight helicopter as it approached. As we boarded, Doc came over and shouted in my ear. The three of them were pretty heavily drugged up to make them compliant as to what was going to happen. I've given them something to counteract what they were given. The two younger ones are not doing too well. I'll stay with them, but you'll have to handle the older one. When she begins to come out from under of the effects of what she was given, she'll be disoriented and scared. Do what you have to do to keep her calm. He instructed me. Sure enough, some 15 minutes after we took off for our flight back, she began regaining her faculties, stood up and started struggling and flailing her arms around. I managed to wrap her up in my arms and pull her down onto my lap, whispering calming words in her ear. She soon settled down, but every time I tried releasing her, she began struggling again. I had no choice but to continue holding her against my body for the remainder of the 90-minute flight back to base. Once I looked past the dirt and dried tears on her face, I saw she is a very pretty young woman. Over the next 90 minutes, I had time to reflect back on my life that had brought to this moment. I was almost 15 years old when my dad left on one of his extended business trips one morning. As he did every time he left on one of these trips, he took me aside and said to me, "Rick, be sure to take good care of your mom and sisters for me while I am gone. You are the man of the house until I come home. I will, Pop. I promise you I'll take care of them," I replied. Little did I realize then how much that promise would impact my life. My father never came back. It was the middle of winter and a severe ice storm had struck the just day before he left. The roads were still icy and his car hit a patch of black ice. Unable to regain control, he crashed into a large tree. We were told he died instantly. His life insurance was just enough to pay for his funeral and a few months of mortgage payments. Mom had a job at the local library, but it didn't pay enough to support the four of us. Her, my two younger sisters, and me. She found a part-time job, working from the time she got off at the library until 11 at night, as well as all day Saturday and Sunday. Even with that added income, we only just managed to scrape by. Working all those hours soon took a toll on her. She was always tired and fast becoming worn out. As soon as I turned 15, I got a part-time job working at the market after school and on Saturdays. I gave everything I earned to my mother. It helped, and she was able to cut back on some of the extra hours she was working. When I turned 17, I left the market and got a job on the loading dock of the local factory. I worked the night shift from when school let out to midnight. It paid a whole lot better, and with that income, Mom was finally able to quit her part-time jobs. Even with working all those hours, I still did well in school. So well that I was the valedictorian of my high school class. My guidance counselor encouraged me to take the SATs, and I had a perfect score on the mathematics portion and missed a perfect score on the verbal section of the exam by 2 points. I had offers from several universities and colleges. I soon realized that even with a full academic scholarship, we wouldn't be able to afford the incidental costs. Besides, my mom and sisters depended on my income from the loading dock at the factory to make ends meet. My sisters were still too young to get jobs, so I decided to forget college and continue working at the factory. I was bound and determined to keep the promise I made to my father. Then the economy went south and the factory was forced to close. There were no other jobs available. I decided to investigate the military. The Marine Corps appealed to me, so I enlisted. When I told my mom, she was not happy. But she reluctantly became convinced when I told her I would be getting 3 meals a day 7 days a week. All my clothing would be provided and I would have free health care, as well as being able to enroll in online courses for college credit. I made arrangements to have most of my monthly pay sent home for Mom and my sisters to replace what I had been earning at the factory. I was sent to Parris Island, South Carolina, for basic training. It was tough. I kept my eyes and ears open and did what I was told without any questions or arguments. The first time we went to the rifle range, I had a ball. I had always been blessed with excellent eyesight and great eye-hand coordination, so I did real well at the range. My drill instructor was impressed with my uncanny ability to group my shots within a quarter of an inch on any target at any range from 200 out to 400 yards using just the iron sights of the weapon. I did so well that upon completion of boot camp, I was sent to sniper school. After finishing sniper school, I had a year and a half of additional training before I was sent overseas for my first tour of duty in Iraq. Now I was just beginning my 4th tour. Being stationed in a war zone qualified for extra hazardous duty pay. That, coupled with no income tax, made it attractive for me to keep volunteering for the additional tours. I really could use the money since my sisters were now in college, and the money I sent them really came in handy. I snapped out of my reminiscing back to the present when the woman on my lap began squirming and wiggling around. Somehow she had managed to free her arms from my bear hug, and they were now firmly wrapped around my neck with her head nestled under my chin. When we landed, I helped her out of the aircraft into the waiting arms of the medical team that was there to meet us. She placed her hand behind my head, pulling it down to her lips, and gave me a long kiss. "Thank you for everything," she whispered in my ear before giving me another kiss. Before I could respond, Doc called to me from inside the helicopter. "Gunny, give me a hand with these two. They're still in pretty bad shape." Returning to the aircraft, I re-entered. Doc was struggling with two terrified young girls that appeared to be in their early to mid-teens. They had been severely traumatized by their ordeal and now found themselves surrounded by strangers. No wonder that they were hysterical and refusing to move. Doc picked up the older of the two, exited the helicopter, and I followed, carrying the other young girl. They were both crying and clutching at us as we walked to the medical staff. As soon as they saw the older woman, already in the vehicle, they calmed down and allowed themselves to be placed alongside of her. After they left, I retrieved my weapon and walked to my quarters. I field stripped the rifle and thoroughly cleaned it. After showering and changing into a clean set of BDUs, I walked over to the hospital. Stopping one of the medical staff, I asked if I could see Miss Thornton. A doctor heard my request and walked over to me. "Afraid not, Gunny. We ran a blood test on her to determine what she had been given. Those scumbsuckers loaded her up with all kinds of crap. It'll take at least 24 hours to flush her system out before we even let the intel boys debrief her. Best guess is that you'll be able to see her in about 2 or 3 days. Thanks, doctor. Will you tell her I came by to see her? She doesn't know my name, so just tell her I'm the guy from the helicopter." "I can do that," he responded. I woke up to find a nurse standing over me. The first words out of my mouth was to ask where was I and what day was it. "Well, it's just after 4 in the afternoon, and you were brought in yesterday morning, Tuesday, just before 11 in the morning, I was told. You have had a rough couple of days, but by all indications you're going to be just fine. Are you up to a couple of visitors?" I was asked. "I guess so," I answered. "Good afternoon, Miss Thornton. I hope you're feeling better. I'm Major Williams, and this is Captain Collins. To set your mind at ease, your parents have been notified of your rescue and safe return. I have made arrangements for you to talk with your father as soon as we are finished here. We are with military intelligence, and we have some questions for you if you're feeling well enough to answering them for us." "I guess so. What you do want to know? Why don't we start from when you were captured and taken hostage and go from there?" "Okay. After all those men broke into the facility I was working at, they went from room to room shooting anyone who resisted. When they came upon me, I was counseling 2 young girls who had been sexually abused. I heard one of them say that I was the one they were looking for. Their leader remarked that I should be worth at least $10 million. They tied and blindfolded the 3 of us. We were placed in a truck, and they drove for what seemed like hours, finally stopping at rundown 2-story building. They separated us, and I was placed in a room with who I assumed was the leader, since he was the one giving the orders. He wanted me to give him BJ, but I refused. He forced himself on me. I bit down hard. He screamed and tried to pull away from me. I just bit down harder. He began beating me on my head, but I refused to stop biting him. 2 of his men ran into the room and tried to pull me away from him. Finally, one of them punched me so hard I lost consciousness. When I regained my senses, my mouth was full of blood. I spit it out along with the large pieces of flesh and skin. One of the men came into the room, slapped me, and forced me to drink a bottle of water. After some minutes, I began to feel really funny. That's the last thing I remember until I regained my senses sometime later. I was in some sort of a helicopter and sitting on a man's lap. He had his arms wrapped tightly around me, telling me everything was going to be okay. I felt safe and secure in his arms. I nestled close to him as he continued to whisper calming words into my ear. That's pretty much all I can remember until you walked into my room. Now can you help me fill in the blanks? Major Williams told me that I had been kidnapped and held for ransom by a terror outfit faction that controlled that part of Iraq. The man who tried to force himself on me was Muhammad al-Shari, who commanded that faction. He bled to death from you biting him. I was told. His companions were so incensed by your actions that they decided you had to die. The water you were forced to drink contained a toxic mixture of drugs designed to make you unable to resist or fight for your life. Captain Collins told me that I was saved from being decapitated by a Marine sniper who shot my executioner and 3 others before they could harm me or the 2 teenage girls. Who was the man with me in the helicopter? It was the same man, Miss Thornton. Gunnery Sergeant Frederick Steiger, Major Williams interjected. What else can you tell me about him? Not much, I'm afraid, Major Williams continued. All we know is that he is very good at what he does. He is just beginning his 4th tour here. Never takes any leave to go home between tours. The men in his squad respect and like him, but it appears he has absolutely no social life. He came to see how you were doing several hours after you were brought here. The medical staff told him you weren't able to receive any visitors until they were able to flush the drugs from your system, and we had the opportunity to debrief you. I would very much like to meet him. Can you arrange it? I'll see what I can do, Captain Collins answered, leaving the room. He returned several minutes later and told me that Gunnery Sergeant Steiger was out on a mission and will be gone until tomorrow. I contacted his commanding officer with your request. He assured me that he would pass it on as soon as Sergeant Steiger returns. The following afternoon, there was a knock at my door, and a young man stepped into the room. I'm Gunnery Sergeant Steiger, he said by way of a formal introduction. I'm Emily Thornton, I replied. Please call me Emily, not Miss Thornton. Fair enough. Just call me Rick. It's what my mother and my sisters call me. This was the first time I saw him without his helmet and bulky body armor. My God, he was a real hunk. He was about 6 foot tall with dark brown hair and brown eyes. His smile lit up the room. When he spoke, his voice was deep and yet soft. After we got the, "How are you?" "I'm fine," part of the conversation out of the way, we engaged in a long discussion about ourselves. I couldn't believe how fast time had passed when an orderly came in with my dinner. Rick stood up and announced he would be going so I could eat. I implored him to stay. "Don't go, please. I can eat this cold. I would very much like to continue talking with you." He sat back down, and we continued our conversations late into the evening. I confided to him my life as a spoiled little rich girl. The only reason I was in Iraq was that my grandfather insisted that I do something to help others before coming into the trust fund he had established for me. I told Rick how much the short period of time I spent here had opened up my eyes to what was really important in life. Then he briefly recounted his life from the time his dad died up to the present. I was amazed how much he had sacrificed in order to fulfill the promise he made to his father. When he finally did leave, I gave him a thank you kiss. As soon as he left, I missed him something terrible. I never believed in the old cliché, love at first sight, until today. I wanted to love him, and I wanted him to love me, too. Then I began eating my dinner. Nothing ever tasted as good as that cold food. Late that evening, a doctor came by with the results of my latest blood test. Everything was normal. All the toxins had been flushed from my system. Thank God. The medical staff and I believe that you will be able to travel home in a couple of days. You will require an escort from Iraq to Germany. You'll also require one going on to your hometown. Why don't you call your parents tonight with the news and see what they can arrange in way of an escort for you, the doctor said as he left. Since it was after 10 in the evening, I realized with the time differential, it was just a little past 2 in the afternoon at home, and Daddy would be in his office. Making the call, I explained to him what I wanted. "Are you sure about this?" "You know I'll have to check him out before I agree," he responded. Using my pathetic, little girl voice, I said, "I don't care, Daddy. Just do it for me. Please, Daddy, please." After receiving assurances from his only child that her health was fine, Peter Thornton instructed his secretary to have George Samuelson report to him ASAP. "George, I want everything you can find out about this individual, and I want it before 9 tomorrow morning," I instructed him, handing him a slip of paper with a name written on it. "Awful short notice, boss. I can do it, but it's gonna be expensive. George, I was just about to spend $10 million in ransom money to get my daughter home. Spend whatever you have to. Just get it done." It was a little past 8 that evening when my cell phone rang. The cell phone display simply said, "Samuelson. Mr. Thornton, I'm faxing you everything I have on the name you gave me." It was a piece of cake. The guy is a real straight arrow. There is absolutely nothing adverse in his background. He is an up-and-up guy. Going into my home office, I retrieved the fax, read it over twice, and then made a telephone call. I was having breakfast in the mess hall the morning after meeting with Emily Thornton. I thought to myself about what she had told me about herself. Sure, she was a charming and engaging woman, but she was way out of my league. Better just forget about her. Yes, I was finishing my second cup of coffee. One of the privates who worked in the admin office came up to me and said, "The colonel wants to see you in his office right now, Gunny." When I showed up, I was ushered immediately into Colonel William Jacobs' office. "Have a seat, Gunny," I was instructed. Colonel Jacobs picked up a sheet of paper from his desk, read it, and then said to me, "Gunny, Ms. Emily Thornton will be released from medical care tomorrow and will be flying home. She will require an escort from here to Ramstein Air Base in Germany. Once there, she will be met by someone who will escort her to Frankfurt and will accompany her on a commercial flight back to the States." Why me, Colonel? Why was I singled out for this mission? I don't have that answer for you. Will you accept the assignment? Do I have any choice, sir? Afraid not, Gunny. Get your gear together. You leave tomorrow at 0930. Yes, sir, I answered. I'll be sure to see that she gets there safely. As I stood preparing to leave, he handed me a packet. This is her passport, a couple of her credit cards, and some of her personal items, including her cell phone, we recovered from where she was kidnapped. The following morning, I met Emily at the airfield, returned her passport along, the credit cards, and the rest of her belongings to her, and we boarded. I managed to snag a window seat and the accompanying seat next to it right by the emergency exit. Settling into our seats, Emily grabbed my hand as we rolled out for takeoff. Once we were safely in the air, she loosened her seatbelt and laid her head on my shoulder. Flying on a military transport with a large group of noisy service personnel, excited to be starting on their journey home, is not conducive to any type of intimate conversation. Speaking directly into my ear, she said, "I was so nervous about going home that I didn't sleep well last night. Do you mind if I close my eyes for a bit?" I nodded my consent. Still holding my hand, she reached over with her other hand and grasped my arm. In spite of the loud talking all around us, she managed to doze off as she snuggled even closer to me. I thought to myself what it would be like if we could share moments like this forever. Then reality set in as I knew that in a few short hours she would leave, continuing on the second leg of her journey. When we arrived at the Ramstein Air Base, we deplaned and I walked with her into the terminal, where she was to meet her escort for the remainder of her trip home. Instead, we were greeted by a 2-star general. There was a change in plans. The escort scheduled to accompany her was unable to fulfill his obligation. The general handed me new orders, along with an envelope containing travel documents and instructions. Then he wished us a safe journey and left. I failed to notice the big smile on Emily's face when she heard about the change in plans. Grasping my arm, she looked up at me and said, "Looks like you are stuck with me for a few more days." "Appears so," I replied, secretly pleased by the turn of events that would allow me to continue living in my fantasy world. "I promise that I will see you safely back home." In the envelope that the general gave me were 2 train tickets for travel between Ramstein and Frankfurt. Once we arrived in Frankfurt, the instructions said to take the S-Bahn, surface rail, from the Hauptbahnhof, main railway station, to the airport. From there, we were to go to the Hilton Garden and Frankfurt Airport. The accommodations were prepaid. Then the following morning, we were to go to the Lufthansa counter in Terminal 1 to acquire our tickets and boarding passes for the flight to Boston's Logan International Airport. A car would be waiting to take Emily to her home in Marblehead, Massachusetts. Rick took my hand and led me toward the waiting train at the Ramstein station. Since it was a local, we would have to change trains twice, once in Landstuhl, and the second change at the Mannheim Hauptbahnhof. The first 2 legs of our journey went smoothly. The trains were crowded, so all we pretty much could do was gaze out the window at the German countryside. As we were walking through the Mannheim station toward the track that the Frankfurt train would depart from, a crazed man with an automatic rifle came running toward us shouting. Before I knew what was happening, Rick pushed me to the floor and threw his body on top of me. I was aware of bullets striking the pavement all around us. Then I heard additional volleys of automatic weapons firing. German security had reached the scene and killed the man. Rick rolled off of me and asked if I was okay. Before I could answer, I saw blood all over his chest. Somehow I managed to pull him to a sitting position, wrapping my arms around him and crying hysterically. "I love you," were the last words he spoke to me as his eyes closed. "No. God, no." I screamed, holding Rick's lifeless body as his blood ran down my arms. I never felt the hands that pried me away from Rick's body. A blanket was wrapped around me as I watched several men place Rick's body on a gurney and rush him away. One of the men yelled something in German that I didn't understand. Then another man helped me to my feet, and we began running to keep pace with the 2, pushing Rick to a waiting ambulance. He was alive, just barely, but alive. When we arrived at the hospital, Rick was rushed into surgery. I sat outside the operating room waiting for several hours while the doctors worked feverishly to save his life. I called my father, telling him what had happened. "I'll leave your mother for a day or 2 with a nurse, and I will be there as soon as I can to bring you home, Pumpkin." "No, Daddy. Stay with Mom. She needs you more than ever now. No matter how everything turns out, I'm staying here by myself. For the first time in my life, there is someone more important than me." Before Rick was wheeled into the operating room, they gave me his personal possessions to hold. I went through his wallet and found his mother's phone number. Then I made the hardest phone call I ever made in my entire life. "Hello, Mrs. Steiger. My name is Emily Thornton. I have some very bad news about your son." I explained to her the circumstances that resulted in her son being shot. She started crying, so I gave her several moments to compose herself. As soon as she settled down, I continued telling her that her son was in surgery, but the prognosis was not encouraging. I told her to get her passport and go to the airport. I would arrange to have an airline ticket waiting there for her. When she told me she didn't have a passport, never needed one, it complicated things. This was a problem my father, even with all of his connections, could not fix. I promised her I would call her immediately with any news of a change in his condition as soon as I learned of it. 5 hours later, I called her back. Rick had come through surgery, and the doctors said the next 72 hours would be critical for his recovery. I called every few hours with updates on his condition. We soon were on a first-name basis. No more Mrs. Steiger. She was now Barbara, and I was Emily. The hours stretched into days, and the days into weeks before he was well enough to be released from the hospital. Now it was me who would be escorting him home. I secured a car and driver to take us to Frankfurt Airport. I didn't want to take the train. Too many bad memories. When we were safely on our way, I told Rick that I would take him home first, and then would make my own way home afterward. He looked at me and simply said, "No. I made you a promise that I would see you safely back to your home, and I fully intend to keep my word." When we arrived at the airport, I had the driver drop us off at the square, where the Hilton Garden Inn was located. Our original reservations had long since expired, so I had called ahead to secure new ones. I was told that there was only one room available. I had no choice but to book it. We checked in at the front desk and went up to our room. Rick opened the door for me and stepped into the room after I entered. "Oh, looks like we have a problem," he remarked. "There's only one bed. Well, I'll just sleep on the floor. It won't be the first time, or, if you prefer, I'll spend the night in the lobby." "You'll do neither, Rick. It's a king-size bed. Plenty of room for the two of us. I promise not to attack you in the middle of the night. But that's a promise I may not be able to keep." I smirked. It took all the willpower I possessed, but I was able to keep my word. Darn it. I woke early the next morning before Rick. After showering and dressing, I slipped out of the room for a few minutes and made a call to my father. I had forgotten about the time differential, and his phone rang for quite some time before he answered. After I explained I was fine and everything was okay, I said to him, "Daddy, I have a big favor to ask." I told him what I wanted. He said he would do what he could. When I re-entered the room, Rick was just getting up. "Come on, sleepyhead. We have a plane to catch." It was just a short walk from the hotel to Terminal 1 and the Lufthansa desk. I had already made arrangements for our flight back to Boston/Logan, so checking in was a snap, especially since we were flying first class. With our boarding passes in hand, we cleared the security checkpoint and proceeded to the departure gate. Not long afterward, we boarded and took our seats. Rick looked at me and with some wonder in his voice said, "Really, Emily, really? First class?" Flying home in first class with Emily just reaffirmed my earlier belief. This woman was way out of my league. I mean, 2 first-class tickets probably set her back at least $7,000. This girl spent money like there was no tomorrow. Yep, way out of my league. 8.5 hours later, we arrived in Boston. After clearing passport control and customs, we entered the arrival hall where Emily spotted someone she recognized. Taking me by the hand, she introduced me. "Rick, this George Samuelson, my dad's right-hand man. George, this is Gunnery Sergeant Frederick Steiger, the man who saved my life. Twice." George shook my hand vigorously, slapped me on the back, and said that Mr. Thornton would have accompanied him, but that Emily's mother was still recovering from surgery, and he did not want to leave her alone. He walked us out of the terminal to the short-term parking lot and, after placing our luggage in the trunk of his car, we set off for Emily's home in Marblehead, Massachusetts. A little less than an hour later, we pulled up to a wrought iron gate that swung open, allowing us to drive up to the house. We had no sooner stopped and gotten out of the car when the front door opened and an older man rushed out of the house. Enveloping Emily in his arms, I heard him say, "Thank God you are home safely, Pumpkin. Your mother and I have been so worried about you." Releasing Emily, he grabbed me in a bear hug and exclaimed, "You must be the man who saved my daughter's life. There is no way I'll ever be able to repay you, but I will damn sure try." Taking me and Emily by the arm, he walked us into the house. Sitting in a wheelchair in the foyer with a blanket over her legs was a woman I took to be Emily's mother. As soon as Emily saw her, she broke free from her father and rushed over shouting, "Mom, Mom, what are you doing out of bed? Are you okay?" George said something about another surgery. Before Emily could get another word out, her mom pulled her onto her lap, hugging and kissing her. "Calm down, Pumpkin, calm down. Yes, I have had several surgeries. The first was 2 days before you were kidnapped. It was partially successful, but it encouraged me to continue in the hopes of walking again. The second one was just about the time you were to originally come home. That is why your father was unable to go and get you. The final one happened just a few days ago. The doctors told us, looking at Emily's father, that there is no reason I won't be able to resume a full and active life in a few months. With Emily pushing her mother's wheelchair, her father took my arm, and we followed them into the sitting room. Emily proceeded to tell her parents the entire story from the time she was taken captive until we arrived in Boston. She did leave out a little of the more descriptive parts of her captivity. I don't think her mother or father could have handled the part of how Muhammad al-Shari died. When she recounted the incident at the railway station in great detail, both her mother and father had horrified looks on their faces. They interrupted her narrative to ask me how I was. Had I recovered? After reassuring them that I was well on my way to a full recovery, Emily finished her story. At that moment, a member of the household staff announced that lunch was ready. After eating, I asked Mr. Thornton if he could have George take me back to the airport as I wanted to fly home to my mother and sisters. He replied, "I am afraid George is not available right at the moment. He is running an errand for me at this time. As soon as he returns, we will see about reuniting you with your family." "Let's all go back to the sitting room," Emily suggested. "We can sit by the fire for a while and relax. My wife and I have planned a party tonight to celebrate Emily's safe return. We want you to be a part of this celebration. Please say you will stay," Emily's dad implored. "I appreciate the invitation, and under any other circumstances I would say yes. But I have not seen my mom and sisters in over 3.5 years. I'm kind of anxious to get going," I said as I stood. "No, Rick. You have to stay," Emily exclaimed as she clutched my arm. That same sentiment was echoed by a voice from behind me. I turned to see my mom standing there. She rushed over, and the next several minutes were filled with hugging, kissing, and a lot of tears. I will admit a lot of those tears were mine. "However did you get here? I mean, I don't understand how did." Emily and her father arranged all of it. "I received a telephone call very early this morning from Mr. Thornton, telling me to pack enough clothes for a week and for your sisters to do the same. I had to explain that both of your sisters were taking their final exams at the university. I knew they would drop everything to come, but I also knew that they had to stay behind and finish their tests. Mr. Thornton had arranged for a car to pick me up and take me to the airport. This nice man," she continued, nodding at George, "picked me up and drove right here. We'll leave you two to catch up with each other," Peter said, escorting his wife and Emily from the room. Boy, did we ever catch up with what had happened since the last time I saw them. Mom told me both my sisters were finishing their last semester of college. They were still living at home for the time being. "Rick, I want you to stop sending money home. I don't need it anymore. I've been promoted to oversee the entire library system for the county. The job comes with a substantial bump in salary. You have made enough sacrifices in your life for me and your sisters over the years. You have more than kept your promise to your father. He was so very proud of you. But now it's time for you to think about yourself." Just then Mom's cell phone rang. It was Robin, the older of my two sisters, calling to find out where Mom was. Mom told her what had happened, and Robin was so excited, screaming and yelling for Linda to come to the phone. Mom handed me her phone, and, as soon as the two of them had calmed down, I was able to tell them what had been happening. After I had finished explaining everything, I asked about their exams. They both had finished 2 of their final exams and had 3 more to take to complete the term. As we finished talking, I told them to study hard, and I would see them in a few days. Later that afternoon, Emily reminded me about the party for that evening. It was to be held at the country club and was to be a semi-formal affair. "Please wear your dress uniform for me. I want to show you off to everyone," she exclaimed, kissing me on my cheek as she skipped off. When we arrived at the club, it appeared that the party was already in full swing. Mr. Thornton, pushing his wife in her wheelchair, let us in. Emily had grasped my arm as we followed. George Samuelson escorted my mother right behind us. Holy crap, there had to be over 100 people in the room. As soon as the crowd saw us, they erupted into cheers and hand-clapping. Evidently, Emily was a very popular young woman. We were soon mobbed by well-wishers and admirers. Emily was overwhelmed by her friends. She tried her best to include me, but it was soon apparent her friends were really not interested in me. There was one guy. He was introduced to me as Quentin Reynolds, as he proceeded to shoulder me aside to embrace Emily. I thought he was a little too familiar and intimate with her. To her credit, she slipped away from his embrace and rejoined me. "Old boyfriend, ex-old boyfriend," she whispered. As he moved along, he gave me a snotty and condescending look. After the crowd of well-wishers dissipated, Emily excused herself to the ladies' room. I took the opportunity to step outside onto the patio for a breath of fresh air. Standing there, I thought to myself just how insufferable some of these people were. Many of them didn't even acknowledge my presence in spite of Emily's attempts to include me in the conversations. Standing at the edge of the patio, overlooking the darkened golf course, someone grabbed me by the arm, spun me around, getting in my face, said, "I want to speak to you, a-hole. I don't know who you think you are, with Emily falling all over herself, hanging on your arm and everything. You think just because you saved her it means something. My tax dollars pay you do that. You're nothing but an ignorant, stupid jarhead. You are not even close to being in her class." As he continued his tirade, he drew a crowd from amongst the guests. Just as I was getting ready to teach this insufferable scumsucker a lesson, Emily, her father, and George Samuelson pushed their way through the crowd. The look on Emily's face rapidly changed from shock and horror to anger. "Quentin Reynolds," she screamed furiously. "How can you say such horrible things? Get out. Get out. Leave right now." Now, Peter Thornton is not a small man, but George was at least 5 inches taller and 50 pounds heavier. "Get the hell out of here right now, Quentin," Peter thundered. "George, help this piece of trash out of here." "With pleasure, boss." Then George grabbed Reynolds by his collar and the seat of his pants and frog walked him through the assembled onlookers, throwing him out with a warning not to return. Peter Thornton quieted the crowd down and announced, "Sorry about all the commotion, folks. Now that we have removed that despicable piece of humanity, I need to explain a few things to all of you about this young man. This is more than a just celebration of Emily's safe homecoming. It is also a celebration to honor a man who has sacrificed so much in his own life for others." He then briefly recounted the story of my life from the time my dad died, right up to the time I was wounded in Germany. If this man had not been there for my daughter, she would not be alive today. My wife and I will be forever in his debt, a debt we can never adequately repay. Somewhere from the back of the assembled guests, someone began to clap. Soon everyone was clapping and cheering. It was several minutes before the crowd was quiet enough to hear him say, "My friends, please let's go back inside and resume the festivities." As we walked back inside, Peter came up and confided to me, "I hope you don't mind me telling everyone about your private life, Rick. I had George check up on you several months ago. After all, Emily is my only child. Your mother filled me in on all the gaps this afternoon. You are quite an admirable young man, Frederick Steiger. I am proud to say I know you." Several days later, I had to tell Emily that I had to go back to Iraq. I would be leaving in the morning. She was crying and holding on to me, saying, "No, no, you have to stay with me. I need you. I want you more than anything I have ever wanted in my entire life. I can have Daddy fix it so you don't have to go back." "Emily," I replied, "when I entered the Marines, I swore an oath, a solemn promise to serve and protect my country. What kind of man would I be if I went back on my word?" The next morning I left. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do in my entire life. My last vision of Emily was seeing her sobbing in the arms of her father. 2 years later, I awoke from another troubled night filled with the same nightmare of that tragic day 2 years ago when the love of my life left me. The spot next to me in bed was empty. I could hear sounds of my new husband, of only 1 month, in the kitchen preparing breakfast for the two of us. He soon returned carrying a tray with coffee and buttered toast. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he handed me a mug of piping hot coffee and a slice of toast. After I finished my coffee, he placed my empty mug on the night table. "Was it the same nightmare?" he asked. I nodded my head yes, but the frequency of it has dropped significantly since our wedding. "Emily, it's been 2 years now. You have got to let it go. It wasn't your fault. No one blames you. But I blame myself. If I hadn't been so selfish, it never would have happened. All I ever thought about was me, me, me. Everything I ever wanted, I got. Truth be told, I'm not unhappy about having the nightmares. They serve to remind me of just how much I could have lost. Now, I just need you to hold me." My husband got back into bed, rolled over to me, and held me tightly in his arms, whispering the same comforting words he had said the night before as he calmed me down from my nightmare. I began kissing him as my hand began caressing his naked shoulder. My fingers lingered lightly over the scars left by the 2 bullets that had struck him as he lay on top of me, protecting me that afternoon over 2 years ago. Looking into his eyes, I whispered, "I love you so very, very much, Rick. Just hold me and never let me go." Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
In this emotional narrative, we dive into the story of James and Sarah, whose love story began like a fairy tale. Their wedding was a joyous celebration, and their life together was filled with happy memories. However, subtle changes in Sarah's behavior began to sow seeds of doubt in James's mind. Friends and family hinted at unusual behavior, leading James to investigate further. His world shattered upon discovering Sarah's affair with a coworker. Overwhelmed with shock, anger, and betrayal, James sought support from loved ones and began couples therapy with Sarah. Together, they faced the underlying issues in their marriage, leading to a pivotal decision point. Through intense, heartfelt conversations, they chose to rebuild their relationship, committing to forgiveness and open communication. Their journey of healing strengthened their bond, teaching them valuable lessons about love and resilience. In the end, they found renewed hope and a stronger, more committed relationship, ready to face the future together. Hello, my friends. I hope all you are fine. This is Narrative Stories channel. Let's start this story. James and Sarah's love story began like a fairy tale. Their wedding day was a joyous celebration, surrounded by family and friends who cheered for their union. The sun shone brightly as they exchanged vows, promising to cherish each other forever. Their honeymoon was a blissful escape, filled with laughter and intimate moments that cemented their bond. Over the years, they created countless memories, vacations exploring new places, family gatherings where their laughter echoed, and quiet evenings at home, sharing dreams and aspirations. James, a dedicated husband, and Sarah, a loving wife, built a life that seemed picture-perfect. James often reflected on how fortunate he was to have Sarah in his life. Their 15 years together were filled with mutual respect, deep affection, and unwavering support. They were partners in every sense, facing challenges head-on and celebrating successes with equal fervor. Their home was a sanctuary, a place where love and trust flourished. James's heart swelled with pride as he thought about their journey, the moments that defined their relationship, and the future they envisioned together. Little did he know, the foundation of their perfect marriage was about to be shaken to its core. It started with small, almost imperceptible changes. Sarah began staying late at work more frequently, claiming increased workloads and important projects. Her phone, once casually left on the counter, was now always with her, and she took calls in hushed tones. James noticed her paying more attention to her appearance, buying new clothes, and wearing makeup more often. Initially, he brushed off these changes, attributing them to her career ambitions and personal growth. After all, he trusted Sarah completely and had no reason to doubt her fidelity. As weeks turned into months, the subtle changes became harder to ignore. Friends and family occasionally hinted at Sarah's unusual behavior, their comments sowing seeds of doubt in James's mind. He found himself replaying conversations, analyzing Sarah's actions, and feeling an unsettling sense of unease. The loving, carefree moments they once shared were now overshadowed by suspicion. Determined to dispel his fears, James decided to investigate further. He hoped to prove his doubts wrong, clinging to the belief that their love was unshakable and that Sarah would never betray him. One evening, while Sarah was in the shower, James noticed her phone buzzing on the nightstand. He hesitated, then picked it up, intending to respect her privacy, but driven by an urgent need to know the truth. His heart sank as he read through the messages between Sarah and her coworker, revealing an intimacy that went beyond mere friendship. The shock of betrayal hit him like a physical blow. When Sarah emerged from the bathroom, James confronted her, his voice trembling with hurt and anger. At first, Sarah denied everything, but the evidence was irrefutable. Finally, through tears, she confessed to the affair. James felt as if his world had collapsed. The emotions were overwhelming: shock, anger, sadness, and an intense sense of betrayal. He couldn't understand how the woman he loved and trusted had been unfaithful. Sarah, equally distraught, explained how the affair had started: long hours at work, growing close to her coworker, and ultimately crossing a line she never intended to cross. She expressed deep regret, pleading for James's forgiveness, But James was lost in a sea of conflicting emotions, struggling to comprehend how their seemingly perfect marriage had reached this devastating point. In the days following the revelation, James felt a profound sense of isolation. Unable to process his emotions alone, he confided in his best friend, Mark. Mark listened patiently, offering a shoulder to cry on and practical advice. James also reached out to his sister, Emily, whose compassionate support helped him navigate the initial shock. Despite the comfort from loved ones, James grappled with the reality of the betrayal, his mind swirling with questions and doubts. The once clear path of his life was now clouded with uncertainty and pain. Desperate to understand the root causes of the affair, James and Sarah decided to attend couples therapy. Their therapist guided them through painful but necessary conversations, revealing underlying issues in their marriage that had gone unnoticed. Sarah admitted to feeling neglected and unappreciated, while James acknowledged his tendency to become absorbed in work, inadvertently neglecting their relationship. These sessions were emotionally draining, but crucial in uncovering the cracks that had led to infidelity. Slowly, they began to see a glimmer of hope, realizing that healing was possible if they were both willing to put in the effort. James stood at a pivotal crossroads, faced with the daunting decision of whether to forgive Sarah, remembered the love and happiness they had shared. On the other, the pain of betrayal was still fresh and raw. James knew that either choice would come with its own set of challenges and consequences. He spent sleepless nights contemplating his future, torn between his heart and his mind. In an effort to gain clarity, James and Sarah had a series of intense, heartfelt conversations. They revisited their past, discussing what had gone wrong and how they had drifted apart. Sarah was vulnerable and honest, expressing deep remorse for her actions and a sincere desire to make amends. James, though still hurt, found himself opening up about his own shortcomings and fears. These conversations were painful but necessary, revealing their true feelings and helping them understand each other better. Through this process, they both began to see the possibility of a path forward. After much soul-searching, James made the difficult decision to forgive Sarah. It wasn't an easy choice, but he believed in the strength of their bond and the possibility of redemption. Together, they committed to rebuilding their marriage, taking concrete steps to restore trust and intimacy. They set aside regular time for open communication, shared activities, and date nights to rekindle their connection. They also continued therapy, both individually and as a couple, to address their emotional wounds and prevent future issues. Gradually, they began to heal, their relationship growing stronger and more resilient. As time passed, James and Sarah found themselves in a renewed relationship, one built on honesty, transparency, and mutual respect. The scars of the past were still there, but they served as reminders of their journey and the lessons learned. Their love had been tested and had emerged stronger for it. They appreciated each other more deeply and made a conscious effort to prioritize their marriage. The future, once uncertain, now looked promising, filled with hope and a renewed sense of commitment. They had faced a tremendous challenge and come out the other side, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. James often reflected on the journey of healing they had undertaken. He realized that facing challenges together had not only strengthened their bond, but also taught them valuable lessons about love and forgiveness. He understood the importance of resilience and the power of second chances. James was grateful for the support they had received and the steps they had taken to rebuild their marriage. He hoped their story would inspire others facing similar struggles, showing that it is possible to overcome even the deepest wounds with patience, effort, and a willingness to forgive. In the closing scene, James and Sarah are seen enjoying a quiet, happy moment together. They sit on their porch, holding hands and watching the sunset, a symbol of the renewed commitment and strength of their bond. The once stormy skies of their relationship have cleared, leaving behind a beautiful horizon filled with promise. Their journey has been one of pain and healing, but ultimately it is a testament to the enduring power of love. As the sun sets, they share a smile, knowing that together, they can face anything the future holds. Thank you for being a part of Narrative Stories. Your support and engagement mean the world to us. We are committed to bringing you the best in storytelling. What kinds of stories would you like to see next? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
James and Lena Morgan's marriage seemed perfect to the outside world. He was a successful lawyer, and she was a talented interior designer. But beneath the surface, their lives were unraveling. While James was consumed by his career, Lena found herself growing distant, craving excitement and passion that her husband no longer provided. Enter Ryan Harris, a charming fitness trainer with a talent for manipulation, who quickly became the spark Lena was searching for. As their secret affair deepened, James remained oblivious, trusting his wife and his best friend, Sophia, who had grown suspicious of Lena's behavior. But when James accidentally uncovers evidence of the betrayal, he must confront the reality that his perfect life is a lie. What follows is a storm of deception, revenge, and heartache, one that will test the limits of trust, loyalty, and love. Will James unravel the truth in time, or will he lose everything to the darkness of betrayal? The sun set over the city skyline, casting an orange glow over the luxury apartment that James and Lena had spent years building together. Their life seemed picture-perfect to the outside world. James was a successful corporate lawyer at one of the top law firms in the city, while Lena ran her own flourishing interior design business. They had everything: wealth, status, a beautiful home, and a love story that people envied. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. James was often busy with work, leaving early in the morning and returning late at night. His career was his life, and Lena was understanding, at least she appeared to be. But as time passed, Lena became increasingly withdrawn. Her late-night dinners with friends, spontaneous weekends away, and growing distance from James became more frequent. James, too preoccupied with his own ambitions, barely noticed the shift at first. He trusted Lena implicitly and believed her when she said she needed me time to decompress. She always reassured him that everything was fine, but the smile in her eyes seemed to be fading, replaced by a coldness he couldn't explain. It was a Tuesday evening when the first seed of doubt was planted in James's mind. He had come home after a grueling 14-hour day at the office. As he walked through the door, he noticed Lena's purse lying on the kitchen counter. Normally, Lena was meticulous about putting everything in its place, but this was unusual. He picked it up and noticed something strange: a hotel receipt. The receipt was for a 2-night stay at an upscale resort just outside the city. But the name on the receipt wasn't Lena's. James's heart skipped a beat. He immediately assumed it was a mistake. Perhaps Lena had booked the room for a business trip, but the details felt off. "Lena!" he called out. His voice was calm, but inside, a storm of questions was brewing. Lena came down the stairs, her hair still damp from a shower. "Hey, babe, what's up?" James held up the receipt. "What's this? Why is there a hotel receipt for 2 nights? You didn't tell me you were going away." Lena's face shifted for a brief moment, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "Oh, it's just a mix-up. I went to the spa last weekend with a friend. We stayed at that resort for a night. It was nothing, just a small getaway. I forgot to mention it." James nodded, but something didn't sit right. He tried to convince himself that it was nothing, but the nagging feeling in his chest wouldn't go away. The following week, Sophia called James after seeing something that disturbed her. She'd run into Lena and Ryan Harris, the local fitness trainer, at a restaurant. They were sitting too close, laughing too intimately for friends. Sophia had always been protective of James, and she knew something wasn't right. "James, I need to talk to you. I saw Lena with Ryan last night. They were together at the restaurant, alone. They didn't look like just friends." James felt a chill run down his spine. "Are you sure, Sophia?" Maybe it was nothing. No, James, I'm telling you, it didn't feel right. I've seen them together before, and it just feels wrong. You need to pay attention. Sophia's words echoed in James's mind for the next few days. He wanted to dismiss them. He loved Lena and trusted her, didn't he? But as the days passed, the doubt only deepened. He started to notice small things that didn't add up. Lena's frequent work trips, her sudden late-night phone calls, the way she smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. James couldn't stand the uncertainty any longer. One evening, he returned home early from work, determined to confront Lena. He found her sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. He sat down beside her, his heart racing. "Lena, we need to talk," he said, his voice firm but filled with hurt. Lena looked at him, surprised by his tone. "What's going on, James? You seem off." James took a deep breath, his mind racing through all the things that had been building up. "I know what's been going on," he said, his voice steady. "I know about you and Ryan." Lena's face drained of color. She quickly stood up, shaking her head. "What are you talking about? You're being paranoid." "I'm not," James said, his voice growing colder. "I know about the hotel receipt, the dinners, the secret getaways. I know about the affair." Lena's eyes filled with guilt, and she looked down, unable to meet his gaze. "James, I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to find out this way. But yes, I've been seeing Ryan. I don't know how it happened. You've been so busy, and I felt so alone. I wasn't getting the attention I needed. I didn't mean to hurt you." James felt the ground slip from under him. The pain was unbearable. His heart shattered as he processed the words. Lena, his wife, had betrayed him. "You don't know how much this hurts," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Lena's face twisted in regret, but it was too late. The trust had been broken, and James knew there was no going back, or Ryan's reputation was ruined. A month passed. James had everything in place. He knew the truth, and now it was time to confront Ryan. One evening, James invited Ryan to a casual dinner at a high-end restaurant. The two men had always been cordial, but tonight, James had no intention of pretending everything was fine. As they sat down, Ryan, unaware of what was coming, ordered a drink, trying to relax. James kept his composure, but beneath the surface, he was seething with anger. "Ryan," James began, his voice calm but filled with authority, "I know about you and Lena. I know about the affair, and I know what you've been doing." Ryan laughed, trying to deflect the situation. "James, I have no idea what you're talking about. You're overreacting." James slid a folder of photographs across the table. "I don't think I am. These are just a few of the things I have on you. Your history, your manipulation, your lies." Ryan's face paled as he realized the gravity of the situation. "You can't do this. You have no proof." "I have all the proof I need," James replied. "And I'm going to make sure everyone knows who you really are." The fallout was swift and brutal. James released the evidence to the public, exposing Ryan's true nature and the affair. Lena, now facing the consequences of her actions, was left alone and broken. James filed for divorce. He moved on with his life, not out of bitterness, but because he had learned that sometimes the hardest thing you can do is let go. Lena tried to reach out, but James no longer cared. He had reclaimed his life, his self-respect, and his peace of mind. James stood at the edge of a new chapter in his life. He had been through the darkness and emerged stronger. He had learned that betrayal wasn't just about another person. It was about how you choose to handle it. The experience had reshaped him. As he stood outside his office, looking out at the skyline, he knew he had taken back control. The truth always finds its way to the surface, he thought, his heart at ease. Thank you so much for watching. the unseen betrayal. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales like this. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think James handled the situation the right way? What would you have done in his shoes? Let us know. Thanks again, and take care.
Approaching April 1st, I eagerly awaited a prank from my husband Lester. Over the years, our history as pranksters had seen an annual increase in the severity of our jokes. The streak of mischief began with me one warm day when Les and I went out. Despite wearing a buttoned-up jacket, I claimed to feel a chill as we strolled through the mall. Suddenly, I removed my jacket to reveal a t-shirt with the words, "I am with stupid," complete with an arrow pointing sideways, standing right next to me. He couldn't initially discern what was on my t-shirt, only noticing the amused reactions of passers-by. It took him a while to realize that every time I shifted position, it was to ensure the arrow on my t-shirt was pointing at him. His face turned crimson, and thus commenced our official prank war. Then came the year when I received an official-looking email, supposedly from the local health department, claiming I had been listed as a lovemaking contact of an Anthony Sanders and instructing me to undergo immediate testing. What I hadn't anticipated was the CC line, including everyone in my office, suggesting they had received the same alarming message. Most of them knew Anthony as an old college boyfriend, oblivious to the fact that I hadn't seen him in over a year, let alone been involved lovingly. Lester, you got me good. Last year I edited a photo, replacing my husband's average-sized member with a comically tiny one and sent it around his office. Truth be told, he's actually above average in that department. He was furious, spending 2 nights away before even considering coming home. No matter how much I apologized, I ended up resorting to an offer of 3 specific favors just to coax him back. 3 bed acts he couldn't refuse. Once home and appeased, he claimed our pranks had spiraled out of control, vowing never to retaliate or prank me again. His promise seemed sincere, but I didn't buy it. I could almost see the gears turning in his head, plotting his revenge. I was certain this year would showcase the darkest corners of his devious mind. I waited, a mix of anticipation and dread. I went to extremes, eavesdropping on his calls, planting a recorder in his car, even scrutinizing our finances for anything suspicious. I was determined not to fall for his prank this time. Yet, my snooping turned up nothing incriminating. He was far cleverer than I had given him credit for. As March passed, Lester appeared unchanged at home while I scrutinized his every move. From midnight on March 31st, I was on high alert. But nothing occurred right after midnight, leaving me on edge. There were still 19 hours for him to spring his plan. I swore to be prepared for whatever he had up his sleeve. The following morning, April 1st, when I descended to the kitchen, he casually offered to whip up breakfast, a rare gesture that immediately raised a red flag. There was no chance I'd consume anything he prepared. I claimed I was in the mood for just cereal. That morning, while pouring myself a bowl and adding milk, I discreetly sniffed it, on the lookout for any added substances. Nothing. A tentative taste confirmed its normalcy. I stubbornly skipped the coffee, citing a reduction in my caffeine intake. Truthfully, I avoided it because he made it. I observed him preparing his beloved ham, egg, and cheese English muffin, almost tempted to ask for one despite the risk. Post-breakfast, we both got ready for work. Amidst checking my toothpaste for tampering and ensuring my cologne retained its usual fragrance, not skunk odor, everything appeared normal except for my sore anxiety. I inspected my car for any suspicious devices, wishing for one of those border-crossing mirrors on a stick to scrutinize beneath. It all seemed regular, yet my heart drummed loudly when I started the engine. Testing the brakes unnecessarily, I scolded myself Lester wouldn't resort to anything physically damaging. I repeated that to reassure myself, but doubt lingered. He was seriously upset about my last prank at work. My enthusiastic best friend, Marta, eagerly greeted me and expressed her curiosity about Lester's antics the previous night. I had confided in Marta about my concerns regarding Lester's impending April Fool's trick. Recalling her support for my prank from the previous year, She jokingly requested an unaltered version of the photo, or even better, a private viewing in our bedroom. I noted her eagerness for some excitement in her life. I shared with Marta that Lester had been relatively quiet, but I was convinced he was plotting something. I could sense it in the air at night. Marta playfully commented on her love for slipping song lyrics into conversations, prompting a chuckle from me. I believe he's prolonging my suspense just to push me over the edge. Well, he doesn't have far to go right now. But mark my words, whatever he pulls, I won't fall for it. He may be the prince of pranks, but I am the queen of jokes. We laughed, and then I finally indulged in my much-delayed morning coffee. I checked my desk for unexpected surprises and went about my work relatively normally, though occasional thoughts of what might await me later lingered. The first time my desk phone rang, I practically leaped out of my chair, chuckling at my own Hayden nerves. Nothing out of the ordinary happened for the rest of the day. I half expected a delivery of risque items that would accidentally be revealed in front of my colleagues, but thankfully, nothing of the sort occurred. As the workday's end neared, my anxiety skyrocketed. At 5, I hit the road, nearly missing the red light. As my mind fixated on what awaited me at home, I gave myself a light slap to refocus on driving safely. Upon arriving home, I started preparing dinner. Lester arrived at his usual time, appearing completely drained. I suspected it was an act, anticipating more theatrics from him soon. I asked if he had a tough day, dealing with too many graduates struggling with basic math. Lester responded that my remark hit too close to home to be funny. He explained that his mood wasn't due to a challenging day, but rather an exasperating one. The quarterly report deadline had kept him occupied with mundane details and figure cross-checking. Usually done before lunch, today's struggle to reconcile two totals that were supposed to match took an extra 4 hours. He even missed lunch and considered calling to say he'd be late for dinner. Fortunately, he caught the error, wrapped up the report before clocking out, and expressed being absolutely famished. He hoped dinner was on its way within 20 minutes. I suggested he fix himself a drink while I finished up, to which he responded positively, appreciating the idea. Lester leaned in, planting a kiss on my cheek before heading to the cupboard where we stored the liquor. He grabbed the bourbon and mixed himself a drink before settling in the living room, tuning in to reruns of Swamp People. It was comical to think he'd ever venture into a place teeming with mosquitoes, alligators, and snakes. I suspected he had a soft spot for people with Cajun accents. During dinner, I attempted to strike up a conversation, but my focus was primarily on uncovering the impending prank. Eventually, I probed, asking if Lester had anything planned for the night. He responded, stating that he had nothing planned after the debacle with the quarterly report. He emphasized that he didn't even consider bringing work home and expressed his desire to unwind with me by his side. Playfully teasing, he mentioned that since his favorite girl wasn't there, I would have to do. I nudged him in response. After dinner, as I filled the dishwasher with the dishes, I suggested watching a movie and snacking on some popcorn. Lester showed interest, and after preparing the popcorn in the microwave, I brought it in a big bowl to the living room, along with our usual drinks to relax. I asked Lester what he wanted to watch, mentioning that while I typically preferred movies with closeness and roughness, I was open to his choice for the night. I suggested Roadhouse, noting its blend of romance, nudity, and violence, not to mention Patrick Swayze's physique. Lester chuckled in response. Sounds good to me. I haven't seen that in a while. I love the part when the stuffed polar bear falls on the stug. Was it a polar bear or a regular bear? I thought it was a polar bear, but we can see. We were watching the movie and eating popcorn. I had a couple of rum and cokes to Lester's, bourbons, and Owl. I was finally beginning to relax and let down my guard. Suddenly the doorbell rang, and my internal alarm went off. This is it, I told myself immediately. No one comes to our house unannounced after dark. I immediately put my mind on DEFCON 1 alert status and was ready to spoil whatever dirty trick he had devised. Lester, of course, venously denied knowing who it might be. Yeah, right. I went to the door and opened it up. I was surprised to see there was a guy, not just an average man, but a huge biker guy at the door. 2 others were on their bikes in the driveway. I shook my head in disbelief. I thought that Lester, this is going to be good. I greeted the scared, tattooed biker with a knowing smile, expressing my awareness of the situation. I apologized for disturbing him and asked if this was where the party was. Responding affirmatively, I slung my arm around his waist, leading him to the center of the living room. Noticing his firm abs and bulging biceps, my husband, seeing me with this stranger, leaped off the couch, bewildered. He questioned who the stranger was, and I played along, stating that he was here to fulfill my fantasy. My husband realized it was an April Fool's joke and expressed his initial confusion. I acknowledged the prank and continued with the act, telling the stranger, whom my husband referred to as Paul, that his prank was over and he could leave. The stranger, calling himself the Bandit, insisted on staying, and I affirmed that I wanted him to stay. I turned to the Bandit, planting an exaggerated kiss on him, much to my husband's dismay. Lester rushed over, and the Bandit grabbed him by the throat, making him stumble and choke. Chuckling, the Bandit pulled me close, caressing my backside while kissing me. I reciprocated, sensing his arousal. Lester charged again, and the Bandit knocked him down with a single punch. Addressing me, the Bandit asked if he should handle Lester or if he should stay and watch. I chose to let Lester watch, stating that it would teach him not to mess with me. The Bandit agreed and stepped outside to inform the others. Inside, one of the men scanned the room and questioned what was happening, noting that it didn't resemble a party. I explained that the lady, referring to myself, wanted to be involved with bikers before heading to the actual party. Commenting on my assets, they discussed their plans, with one expressing the intention to take my rear first. They noticed Lester on the floor and learned he was my husband, whom I wanted to watch. I suggested tying him to a chair and taping his mouth, offering the materials from the garage. Lester protested, declaring that regardless of the situation being a joke or not, it marked the end of our marriage. I responded, accusing him of setting it up and now being upset because I wasn't playing along as he intended. As Lester lunged again, the bikers subdued him and convincingly pinned him to the chair. I wondered if their coordination was rehearsed. The bikers inquired about getting the party started and asked about drinks. I directed them to the liquor cabinet and the fridge for a couple of beers. Bandit turned to me, asking how I wanted to start and how far Lester had suggested they go. I responded, asking Bandit about Lester's instructions, and he looked puzzled. He mentioned I could go all the way however I wanted. In a referenced version, he did it right. If we're going through with this, I could use some help setting the mood. Got anything stronger than liquor? Absolutely. I always carry something. He fetched something intriguing from his bike. A sip later, I found myself swapping kisses with all 3 of them, smirking at Lester, who seemed to struggle to break free. Approaching me, the Bandit declared, "Time to dance, darling," tearing off my dress and swiftly losing my underwear. Soon he was bare, as were his companions. Panic started to grip me. I hadn't anticipated Les would allow things to escalate like this. I shouted to Lester, "Consider this a lesson if you try to outsmart me engaging with his friend." But when I sensed his imminent climax, I attempted to pull away. "Too bad your pleasure isn't our concern. Your job is to satisfy us," they retorted. The following hour felt unreal, despite my objections and resistance in the midst of this chaotic group. At the end of it all, anger boiled within me towards Lester for orchestrating this and then allowing these men to subject me to such things. Each time I glanced at Lester in the chair, rage surged. Yet I masked my distress. I wanted him to believe I relished it, but I couldn't let him think his prank succeeded. After a couple of hours, the bikers departed. My movements were labored, but I managed to reach the kitchen and grab a sharp knife. When I went to release Lester, I discovered his wrists and ankles were injured. His ankles were bleeding, the ropes having torn into his skin. That seemed to have helped him. Certainly I anticipated his explosion, maybe even a physical outburst once the ropes and duct tape were finally off. Standing there, I glittered at him, ready for his expected fury. But instead of a verbal or physical reaction, he looked at me with silent rage, shoved me aside, and ascended the stairs. I retreated to the downstairs bathroom to cleanse the remnants of the bikers from my skin, noticing numerous hickeys scattered across various parts of my body. I remained in the bathroom when the front door slammed shut. Moments later, the screech of Lester's car signaled his departure. I assumed he'd sulk in a motel, a pattern he'd shown before. I silently celebrated my victory in the annual April Fool's prank and retired to bed. Saturday morning arrived, and my phone buzzed incessantly. It was Marta, asking me to spill the details about what Lester had done. I responded, saying he wouldn't believe it and suggested meeting for lunch at Fridays. Marta agreed, urging me not to tease. At TGIF, we indulged in our meal, and I recounted the actual biker encounter that was meant to be a sham, along with Lester's furious reaction. Marta expressed disbelief that I was involved in that, especially considering Lester had set me up for it. Playfully switching to a terrible Southern accent, she pretended to swoon, and I chuckled. I explained how Lester had tried to deceive me with a prank involving facing a biker, only to shout April Fools afterward. I shared that I had outplayed his prank by turning it into a real event. Although I hadn't planned to go that far, it worked in a strange way. I doubted Lester would ever try something like that again. Marta questioned whether I was positive Lester had set it up, expressing disbelief that he would orchestrate something so extreme. The possibility of a messy divorce was raised, and there was a suggestion to get rid of any video, with a cheeky request for a copy. While I dismissed Marta's last remark, her earlier words triggered a troubling thought. What if it wasn't a setup? The idea of a potential divorce weighed heavily on me, a dire possibility I was hesitant to consider. It felt like I might have shattered my marriage, but swiftly I pushed the thought away. Convinced it had to be a setup, that's what I stuck to, reassuring myself and trying to believe it. Then a realization struck me, prompting a question about the last time a biker showed up at my door looking for a party. I wished it were true, and Marta acknowledged the possibility that I was right. The focus shifted to Lester's whereabouts, speculating that he might be sulking in some motel, furious that I had outplayed his prank. Just then, my phone buzzed, and I told Marta to hold on, thinking it might be Lester. However, disappointment washed over me as I realized it wasn't him, but an unfamiliar number. Upon answering the call, a voice I didn't recognize asked if I was Carrie Lynch. Inwardly groaning, I assumed it was a telemarketer and preemptively declined any offers. When the caller identified themselves as the police and mentioned injuries sustained by my husband, I dismissed it as another part of Lester's failed prank. Despite the assurance from the caller, claiming to be a detective named Fredericks, that they had checked my house and spoken to Lester, I doubted the legitimacy of the situation. Refusing to play along, I told the supposed detective that I would be home in an hour, or whenever I pleased. If he wanted to talk, he could come by later. I ended the call abruptly. Marta expressed concern about the police calling me and suggested I should go see Lester. I shared my skepticism, unsure if the caller was genuinely a detective or just another one of Lester's ploys. Convinced that Lester was taking the joke too far, I expressed a desire not to dwell on it and proposed getting dessert, specifically craving chocolate. I arrived home post-lunch to find Lester absent, which wasn't unexpected. Just as I'd started to remove my jacket and hang it up, the doorbell interrupted. Letting out a heavy sigh, I made my way to the door. A female police officer and a man who seemed to be a detective stood there, flashing badges and requesting entry. The shock hit me. It was real, entirely unlike what I had anticipated. Doubts crept in. Perhaps they weren't really law enforcement. I'd asked to see their identification. They presented badges, Idaho cards, driver's licenses, and business cards. Everything checked out. Apologizing for my initial skepticism, I welcomed them in. That's when I remembered I hadn't tidied up from the previous night. The living room remained untouched since I'd gone to bed, displaying empty beer and liquor bottles, stains on the couch and rug, and of course the chair. The detective focused on the chair where Lester had been bound, noting the cut ropes, used duct tape, and blood stains. I hadn't realized there was so much blood. The detective asked if this was where my husband was tied up, and I confirmed, adding that it was a bit more complicated. When asked about the complexity, I explained that my husband had orchestrated an ill-conceived April Fool's joke to make me think a biker gang would attack me. I turned the tables on him, making him believe I wanted something that made him uncomfortable. He got angry and stormed off when I freed him. When questioned about who initially tied him up, I mentioned a biker named Bandit and a couple of others. The detective shared that they had already spoken to Bandit, who was cooperating for a more lenient sentence. According to Bandit, I had invited them for a party, requested medications, and engaged in consensual activities. He alleged that I instructed him to tie up my husband to watch the event, claiming it was our shared interest. The detective needed to know if this was true or if they should pursue exploit charges against Bandit as well. I attempted to stop it, but my efforts were in vain. I was trying to teach my husband a lesson in response to the mess he created, and I just went along with it. I hoped the detective could understand. Tears interrupted my words, and I paused before asking about Lester's condition and whether he was still at the ER. The detective explained that Lester was more angry than anything else. His wrists and ankles were bandaged and sore as expected. Lester had been discharged after a couple of hours, but came to the police station to press charges. The doctor anticipated a physical recovery. Expressing relief that Lester wasn't seriously hurt, I acknowledged that it was his fault, and I didn't want to be made a fool of. The detective commented that I handled it effectively, but reminded me that they were not the judge of fault. Judges and juries would determine that soon. Suddenly, the detective stated that they were arresting me for assault and wrongful confinement of my husband. Additionally, they advised me to get checked for STDs, as one of the bikers I was with had a severe and persistent STD. The detective informed me of my right to an attorney. In a plea for understanding, I explained that it was meant to be a prank on me, and I retaliated. I protested against the arrest, arguing that it was Lester's fault, but the detective insisted that I should tell that to the judge. Subsequently, I found myself in jail, attempting to post bail. However, I discovered that my cards had been canceled. Despite the humiliation, I called my father and fabricated a story until he revealed that Lester had already contacted him. My father, who was close to Lester, berated me for minutes while I sobbed. Eventually, he agreed to bail me out and take me home. Upon arriving home, I sent a text to Lester, pleading for a discussion. To clarify things, his reply was cold. "Everything is clear to me. My response is coming soon. I hope for a face-to-face, or at least a call." Instead, I received divorce papers citing physical exploit and emotional torment. I cried once more. I had allowed a foolish prank to ruin my marriage, an impractical joke to say the least. The trial progressed swiftly. Bandit took the stand as the primary witness. His testimony detailed arriving at the wrong address, being invited by me and others to a party, tying up my husband at my behest, and engaging in consensual relations with me. In exchange for testifying against me, he received a minor sentence for the confinement charge. However, it was my husband's testimony that cut the deepest. He admitted to our history of pranks but insisted he had vowed never to deceive me again. He believed I trusted him. The events of that night shook him to the core, shocking him to an unfathomable degree. Under oath, Lester denied any prior contact with Bandit, any consent to a pretend or real foursome involving his wife, and declared that his love and respect for me vanished that night. Displaying the scars on his wrists and ankles, he mentioned they were a lasting reminder of why he could never trust me again. His admission that he might struggle to trust any woman caused tears, even among some female jurors. My case crumbled when it was my turn to testify. Tearfully narrating my version, I sensed the jury's disapproval, especially from the female members I had hoped to sway. Guilt weighed on me, evident to all, and unsurprisingly, the verdict was guilty. I received a 3 to 5 year sentence, a leniency that could have been harsher. Back in county jail, I awaited transfer to prison when space became available. The final divorce papers arrived during my incarceration, but I barely acknowledged the settlement. One day, Lester visited, and I was puzzled by his presence. He sarcastically remarked that the prison suits me. I acknowledged that I deserved the sarcasm and expressed regret for what I did to him. even if he didn't orchestrate it. Lester responded, stating it was too little, too late, and that he still believed I set him up. He presented a hypothetical scenario, suggesting a twisted motive on his part to orchestrate a divorce with the best terms, a slicker than 50-50 split. He detailed a cunning plan involving squirreling away cash, bribing bikers, deceiving cops, and taking a minor sentence. He mentioned the need for ties to a gang, hinting at someone at work whose brother needed his approval for a promotion. Lester expressed his shock when I took the situation to a level he hadn't anticipated, and he claimed that seeing me enjoy it crushed him. Despite feeling torn between wanting to end both of us, he opted to put me behind bars. Acknowledging his correctness, Lester stated that we were both fools in the mess, but I was the one behind bars. He questioned who the bigger fool was.